Hello, welcome everybody from New Zealand and Australia today. I am the facilitator of the Kanban New Zealand meetup and open to all questions Kanban related in Wellington, New Zealand, or New Zealand in general. So I'm your New Zealand person. Then there is Daniel Pluk, who's dialing in from Melbourne. He's your man in Australia for anything Kanban related. We're doing this together. So he's got the meetup groups in Sydney and Melbourne. And if you are joining for the first time, I think there are quite a few actually joining for the first time. We have a Kanban New Zealand YouTube channel, and you'll find most previous events recorded, the recordings over there. So Daniel, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I'd just like to, thank everyone for coming along. It's another great meetup today, and we've got actually lots of new meetups coming up. We've just made a few announcements for the upcoming meetups next month. We'll talk more about that at the end, but do check out the meetups because we've got a lot of great meetups planned going through to the remainder of the year.
Almost the year already planned out. And we are super excited that we have Janice Linden-Reed here today. Those who have already been to a Kanban Systems Improvement class will know her from the Posit Science case study that we are as preparation work and also very actively dealing with in the class itself. She has been very important for the Kanban community worldwide. She was an ambassador for Kanban University and even one of the founders. And in the journey of all the classes we can offer today, had a big role. Maybe Janice, I hand over to you if you want to say a few words. And yeah, if people have questions, we will answer them after the talk, just in case people need to leave early, but we will probably hang in for a bit longer if people want to stay longer as well. Janice, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Soki and Daniel. So yeah, I have been indeed in the Kanban community for a super long time, since 2008 or so, and was involved in the development of Kanban University. Now currently still run the Limited Whip Society, which lists a lot of meetups and things. And I work at Salesforce currently. I'm an enterprise agile coach there. But I am always thrilled to talk about Kanban, and really, I still feel like it's such a powerful way to really understand and manage and ultimately to improve the way you work. And you can really do a lot in terms of building a visual model for the way that you work. You can have a lot of different categories of work and different SLAs and different capacities and all kinds of really cool things you can do as you develop your system over time. But I wonder, and many people wonder, why so many Kanban systems look like this, where you can't really tell much of what's going on here, except that there's a lot of work in progress. And that's about all you can tell. Even in situations where people go to the classes, someone like Soki or Daniel, they go in and they learn about whip limits and they learn this sort of proper way to do things. And then they go to do it. And it kind of, again, turns into too much work in progress or a lot. So Kanban is very closely associated with flow. You really can't talk about Kanban without hearing that word, but we don't often really talk about what flow is. For example, this is a Kanban board. So is this flow? I mean, how would we know? So I want to talk just for a minute about what flow is and how you would possibly recognize it. And I'm going to contrast it with something else that you might be familiar with, which is batch. So a batch system, you could compare it a bit to like an elevator. Like imagine a bunch of work items, they all pile onto an elevator, and then the doors close, And any additional work items that come along, they have to wait for the next elevator, right? Whereas with a flow system, it's more like an escalator where it's always running, and all you need is to have that spot at the bottom open up so you can step on. So it's something where you would have the opportunity to bring in work on, kind of a more frequent basis. So Scrum, you're probably familiar with that. Scrum is a batch system. And when you have something like sprint planning, that's where you select a specific set of work items. And if you do velocity, you even like count up the value of the individual of that exact set of work items into a single number. That's how committed you are to this idea of that batch that you are planning. So the commitment point, as we call it, would be during planning in a batch system. It would be before the work is started. In a flow system, the commitment point is often when the work becomes work in progress. So the point before that, it doesn't mean that there's no planning or there's no prioritization. You do have all of that. It just means that there's more flexibility allowed in it. So if you wanted to reorder the work or you want to bring in unplanned work, you could do that. But once it crosses that line into becoming work in progress, you're really not supposed to mess with it. You're really supposed to let it go. So therefore, you need to really make sure that it's well organized upstream, right? So what's in the queue really needs to be sorted out so that you can quickly pull the right thing. The other thing you should know about a flow system is the measurement is typically by work item or by either a single work item or very few. So you can measure the time it takes through the system. You can measure how many work items you're getting through. And of course, you would look at the amount of work in progress, because then this escalator, the more work items that are on there, the slower it goes. That's often how that works. So a lot of people have done all kinds of analysis of flow and what constitutes good flow and the traffic studies and all this. And in Don Reinertson's book, he calls out really three essential things. Small batch transfer that has to do with how much work is coming through at once, how much work is moving through. And then limited WIP, which means how much work in progress is in the system at a time. And then rapid feedback, because if something were to be blocked, then you'd want to unblock it quickly so that it could keep moving. So the idea is you want to have enough sort of space in the system to allow for, if there is a problem, that it can be resolved. If it's too full or too jammed up at any point in the system, then you would potentially run into a problem with flow. So how do you know how can you recognize if you have effective flow? You should frequently have a slot opening up to accept new work, and you should be delivering frequently. So you kind of look at that input and output. And so the concept is just really having this pipeline of work that would be flowing through, and there would be this motion, which is why they call it flow, right? It's in motion. So I think it's fair to say that what we're seeing here with this board is probably not a great example of something that's going to achieve good flow, because it looks like a lot of work has been started and not much is being resolved. But the question at hand for us is why? And if you ask people, Kanban experts, they will say a few different things. They might say, well, it's because they don't know Kanban. If they just go to a class or something, if they would just learn, then they wouldn't act this way. Or maybe they would say, well, Kanban is a reflection of how you work. And if they don't understand how they work, then they're not going to know what to do with their Kanban system. So I would like to push back on these ideas because I really believe that the issues happen in the system, and it's more than with the people. So I would like to look for issues in the system that might be affecting this. So what is affecting flow? Well, could it be an issue of delays? Could it be something with the upstream management? Or does it indeed have to do with the mindset of the workers? So let's start with let's start with an issue of delay. So what if we took this idea of they just don't know how to use Kanban? And we said, you know what, we're going to take all that work that they have in progress, and we're going to just sort of jam it in to a WIP limited flow system and see what happens. And it's going to, we're going to move it all into
recording in progress.
We're going to move it all into the, sorry, I'm losing my voice, into the to-do column. And we're going to just, you know, we're going to reset it and we're going to put it through and we're going to see what happens. Okay. So here we go. We've got, they're going to start doing their work. And what happens? There's some quality issues. There's a lot of quality issues. So much that the entire system jams up. So this system can tolerate some level of delay and disruption, but a WIP limited system like this really can only tolerate so much. And it isn't necessarily a quality issue. It could be any kind of disruption to flow. It could be a coordination issue, review cycles, something around confusion or decision authority. So there's all kinds of things that can cause delay in the system. So if there are critical levels of delay and disruption, then that's not really compatible with with flow. And what are they going to do? Are they going to sit on the floor and do nothing? No, they're going to pull more work. And this is how you're going to end up with too much work on the board. Are there practices that can cause this situation? Yes, of course. I mean, like if they pull work and it gets blocked, and so they pull more work and it gets blocked and so on, they pull more work, it gets blocked. But then maybe the first work could be, they could move it along now. Maybe they could even finish that. So they feel like they're only working on a few things at a time, but really what's happening is you've got more and more work in progress and you end up with sort of whirlpool effect. Now you might look at this and say, well, they're task switching, and they are. But the thing about task switching is it can be just a bad habit, but it also can be caused by workers who are overloaded, that they don't have the luxury of time to unblock things because they are overwhelmed. Other things that we might see, lack of collaboration. You might see a lot of work on the board if you've got sort of a per person WIP limit situation. You might have cases where they pull work knowing full well that there's going to be something that they have to wait for. So that's what I would call expected delay. And then, of course, if the work items are too small, you're going to end up with a lot of tickets. If the work items are too large, you're going to have tickets that just get, they just sit there. So all of these things can end up with more and more work in progress. Now, what I'm really referring to here, many of you will recognize are issues around flow efficiency. And I know you all have had, I'm sure you've had speakers here on this channel talking about that. This is the ratio of the work time to the wait time. And the thing about this is with flow efficiency is you end up with these shockingly low numbers, even under good conditions, where the percentage of time that the work is moving is very low in proportion to the amount of time it's just sitting. But I'm talking here about numbers that are so low, that situations that are so severe that it's incompatible with flow. It's not going to happen, and you're really not going to be able to proceed in that kind of way that we would like to see. Could it be instead, though, maybe it's not the team at all, maybe it's upstream management, and management will often have issues of trust or understanding, or both. There's something I like to call the promise of the batch, which is kind of a trust issue. This is where something like with sprint planning, this belief that if an explicit promise is not made, the work will not be done. And so of course, the commitment point in a flow system is at the point where it becomes work in progress. So I wonder if what we're seeing here might possibly be the promise of the batch in another form. Is it possible that the team is reassuring management and saying, yes, we'll definitely do this. See, we've already started it. So it becomes this kind of a way of reassuring the upstream management that the work is really going to happen. But there's lots of other mayhem that the managers can cause. When I said that they shouldn't mess with the work once it's in progress, they definitely mess with the work once it's in progress. So they might be changing priorities, they telling the workers, oh no, don't work on that, work on this other thing. And of course, even just setting up, requesting too much work, often done through a push, not a pull. So pushing work on the workers rather than letting them pull the amount of work that they can focus on. All of these things will cause that, as will planning issues. So if they pull in work and then it turns out that the work is not well specified, or it was started when there are dependencies that were not lined up, there's so many different possibilities. And these all are going to result in work that is not moving forward, that is stuck on there. Another one is the management that wants all work to be considered urgent. I've had this before. Managers who really can't deal with this idea that we call class of service, which is where you apply your capacity to a particular category of work, rather than trying to apply all of your time and energy to all of the work equally. If they're saying everything is urgent, then that's going to be an issue. Okay, so lots of different possibilities with that, but is it possible that we've got an issue with the workers after all? That it isn't only about the issues in the system. So here's the thing with workers. Workers are going to work. They like work to be in progress. So if the work is not moving, they start more work. Now they're doing this in a desperate attempt to make something happen in a situation where they're running into all these barriers. And we know from what was said earlier that more WIP in the system is going to cause more delay. So they're pulling more because of the delay, and then it's getting slower, and it's going on and on. Of course, there are many reasons for this. I really think they're sort of trying to be the heroes in this situation by trying to say, well, that didn't work, let's try something else. And they're pulling more and more work. And of course, there's a political cost to having nothing in progress. And they just want to deliver. Of course they do. Okay, so to achieve flow, we need to look not only at this delay that's inevitably in the system, but the worker's response to the delay. Another issue is that, or not issue, but reality is that they know the work already. If you asked anyone on the team, really, to tell you about a particular ticket. They could tell you about the current status, the dependencies, the previous pattern of work, the expectations. They could tell you all kinds of things about it. So why do they need your Kanban system for? I mean, it's there and it's telling them, that the work is, it's sort of reminding them of the work and saying, oh yeah, this is, but in their head, they're filling in all those blanks. They're saying like, oh, well, yeah, but that's not moving right now. But they've got all of that context. It's just in their head. Another thing is, we don't talk about this much, but I wonder what the impact is of prescriptive methods like Scrum or SAFe or something. If you've had a system that's telling you, what meetings to have, when to have them, what roles, all that, I think is very disempowering. And I think workers often don't feel empowered to assert what they know is the right way to work, which is sad. And they have kind of carved out a way of working that is working for them. And especially if they're dealing with a lot of delay, a lot of problems in the system, then change is just going to feel like overhead. So they're just they're not motivated to seek improvement. So what do you do? Okay, so I asked at the beginning, why do so many Kanban systems look like this? And so I'm suggesting that there are many, many systemic causes compounded with the fact that the workers are pulling more work. So if you go to the workers and you say, what you really need to do is you really need to have WIP limits. Well, that probably isn't, in this situation, that's probably not really gonna go so well. That's probably not gonna really persuade them to talk about best practices. You need to take a multi-pronged approach here. Of course, you need to investigate the issues that are causing delay, but you also are going to need to get the team comfortable with the idea of change and let them know that they can be supported. You have to take a very psychological view here that this is probably a team that has been dealing with a very hard situation, and they have been trying to sort of survive in this quicksand. And so it's going to take some effort to convince them that this is a way they can actually, this can actually help them. You need to gain their trust. So if they can experience some small wins, some small improvements, then they will start on the road toward more serious transformation. And I think that the three concepts they need to really get into are visibility, pull, which is the moving work forward only when you have the ability, the time and capacity to do it. So it gets to that concept of capability and limits. And then focus, so encouraging a focus on finish. Now, these are all things that you can do in very small ways, but they will have a really big impact. So to the point about resolving the sources of delay, because I'm sure people will say, well, why don't you just unblock the work? Why can't you just deal with the delay? The thing about it is a lot of times it will not be in their control. I mean, you can try, you can certainly try to seek out sources of delay, but I seem to constantly hear people talking about flow efficiency, and they're like, well, what you need to do is you just need to not have delay. And it's not, in many situations, that's just not very realistic. I know David Anderson would say, there's very little you can do about the issues of in the flow efficiency, which is why you need to lean so much on class of service. Okay, so I'm going to show you a few examples here. And here's the thing, you being a coach or a team lead, you need to support their current reality. So you are not going to do a Kanban system like this. It's not going to be pretty, probably, even to have this few tickets. In fact, you should not restrict the amount of work. You should embrace the first principle of the Kanban method, which is start with what you do now. And this is where things really get real with that. There's an American expression, this is where the rubber meets the road with this principle, because you need to help them improve their system while embracing or supporting them in having too much work in progress. So here's an example. What if you were to add buffers in their system? Same number of tickets, but now you could encourage them to, every time they finish something, it goes into that holding bin, and this will start to give them an impression of how much capacity they actually have, and possible bottlenecks in their system. It'll also give them a little space, a little breathing room to where they can start actually kind of taking a step back with their work. So that's a very small change that can help them look at things in a different way. Another thing is you could look at the whole upstream side and say, well, why don't we have upstream management be a little clearer about what the input queue is all about? And again, this gets the workers thinking about, okay, well, I'm going to pull more work in because that's what I do, but I'm going to maybe stop and think about the fact that not all that work is the same, that not all of it is equally urgent. So it starts the idea of class of service in a tiny way. Of course, these horizontal rows called swim lanes, these really help visibility, move them toward the idea of class of service. You would need to talk to them to identify a few categories to their work. Those could be work item types. They could be long-term projects versus short-term projects. They could be there could be priority. I mean, it could be any different category that they actually care about. But it would, this is the same number of tickets, but it's starting to tell much more of a story just by having swim lanes. So this goes back to the idea of using visibility. If you don't want to do lots of swim lanes, what if you did a single additional swim lane and you just had them set up, not an expedite lane, but something that where they could have their active work items. And here you actually could start to see flow in that particular lane. Now, of course, they have all this other work that's still in progress, supposedly. It's probably just hanging out. But at least this way, again, it's a way to get them to start to look at their work in a different way and to realize that, okay, this is the work that's truly moving. So ultimately, it would be awesome if these swim lanes could let them develop things like different SLAs and the other thing it will do for them is if there is something that gets blocked, it doesn't necessarily block everything else. So that it will help move them a little bit toward flow in that way. And it could even at some point, they could make the conscious choice to pause work in one lane in favor of work in a different lane. So they start doing sort of a capacity allocation. Okay, so all of these things are just very gentle, very small design changes that kind of reassure them and build trust. Just to say, hey, can you look at things in a little bit of a different way? Part of it is just letting them know they can make any change at all. Because, after being in prescriptive systems or whatever, or they just may not have felt empowered to do this. And they also may have felt that they didn't have time, when in fact, these don't take a lot of time to make these changes. So I am going to show you a few examples from Salesforce. This is a Kanban board that has 3 swim lanes. And these little yellow boxes, these are WIP limits on these. And notice that only the first two swim lanes have WIP limits. The third one doesn't. And the WIP limits are on the entire lane. They're not on columns. So this is, oh, and the other thing I want to call out here is that the top swim lane is titled escalation. So the idea is that if there's an issue with one of the tickets on the lower lanes, it could be moved up. So it's a very easy to understand, very, very supportive kind of design of like, oh, you're having a problem. Okay, we'll move it up over here. So it's, I think it's a very appealing kind of an approach that isn't too radical. What if you had a per person WIP limit? Or something like this would have a ton of tickets on the board. So what would you do? So in this design, we've got two swim lanes, and at the lower swim lane, there are all these columns, and each column has a person's name and a WIP limit at the top. And the way this works is the work comes in on the upper swim lane, and then when it gets to the waiting column, it hangs out there until someone pulls it down into the lower swim lane, and they do the work, and then when they're done with it, it goes up into the closed column in the upper swim lane. So, you know, one thing I really like about this is it just lets everyone have really nice visibility over really a lot of work. And it's, I think, you know, if you're going to have a per person WIP limit, you know, maybe consider something like that. This system is slightly more mature. And here we have 4 swim lanes. You can't see the one at the bottom very well, but the first 3 have WIP limits. The 4th one doesn't at all. And the 3rd one has a lot of WIP limits and a different workflow. So you can kind of see here, I like to do this sort of forensic analysis of a Kanban board. You can kind of look at it and figure out what's going on. And I've seen their policies, so I know that in that 3rd lane, they particularly care about that work and they're more worried about it. So they're putting more visibility and tighter control on that. But it doesn't mean they need to do that all over the place. So these are all examples of find the pain point, find the thing you want to focus on. Don't feel like you need to be smearing, you know, WIP limits absolutely everywhere. Just look for something that will help the workers feel like this is in support of what they do. It's not dictating what they do. And this is something that I think coaches often struggle with. They'll say, oh, that's a terrible board. It doesn't have WIP limits or something. When in fact, there are lots of ways to limit work in progress and to promote focus on flow, even aside from WIP limits at all. But what if you need the promise of the batch? What if you're in that situation where you've got a manager who's saying that, nope, they need that explicit promise and that's what they care about. So this is a financial services company called Amount, and they recently posted this little case study on the Agile Alliance website, and I really liked it. So their situation was that they were doing Scrum, and their team or squad was doing commitment in sprint planning, and then they were really under delivering. So the coach and the Scrum Master at Salesforce, we call him Scrum Lead, they really thought that maybe the issue was that there was the commitment level was too high, right? They were trying to take on too much in sprint planning. And so they proposed that they reduce the sprint commitment really by a lot. And that the way it would work is that they would burn down this short sprint backlog. And then when that is resolved during the same sprint, they would have the ability to then pull work from a prioritized backlog. And they said it was a tough sell. The team, including the product owner, had a desire to commit to more work up front. So promise of the batch, I'm telling you, you thought I made it up, but it's a real thing. And so they because they were able to, communicate about pulling work from the backlog, they said, okay, we'll try it with one team and we'll try an experiment. And over the next few sprints, they found that their velocity or their delivery went way up, even when they raised their commitment levels. So it really proved to everyone involved that, oh, wow, this is the better way to go. So they were saying, oh, low commitment, but when I look at this, I really say, okay, what are we talking about? Smaller batch size, which we know leads to flow, focus on finishing. And they actually created a pull system. They didn't realize it, but that's really what they were doing, is they were pulling work in from the backlog when they had the capacity to take it on. And lo and behold, their delivery got better. So clever model if you are in that situation. Okay, so to recap, flow works when the system isn't too crowded, but system delays will cause workers to pull more work in, and more work will cause the system to be more delayed. Meanwhile, the team does not believe that the process supports them or that the process can be improved. So you need to get to have them experience small improvements so that they have that mental shift and believe that change is possible, at which point they would become more hopeful. So at every point, and especially when you see a board that looks overloaded, you need to really start from a place of compassion and respect. If they've been living in a very painful situation for a long time, it's just going to be reality to them. And they're going to be overwhelmed, and they're trying to keep their head above water. But once they see that the process is there to help them rather than to burden them, then they can wake up to the new options, new possibilities. So why did I call this talk It's in Your Head? Well, for one thing, because they've got a vision of how the work goes, and it'd be great to eventually get that on the board. But really, it's that so much of effective flow is about the ability to see work as a system and to believe in it, to believe that it can be a good thing and that it can be improved. So if you can shift your mindset, or if the team can shift their mindset and they can feel empowered to work, then I think huge things can happen and everything can really turn around with a Kanban system. And I think the baby steps to getting there are to look for opportunities for better visibility, for focus, and for pulling work when you're ready, not all the time. Thank you. And I will take questions. I think there's time.
Oh my God. Thank you, Janice. This was an amazing talk. Lots to think about, and not probably what you would think when you help people to start with Kanban, because everybody is thinking about WIPs in the first place. Thank you so much. Are there any questions from anybody? You can also just unmute and shout out if you like.
I also wanted to thank Janice as well, because this reminded me of so many teams and clients that I've worked with over the last 10 years. It really, I can really relate to the things that you've been talking about. And I'm just wondering if folks can relate to this out in your current workplace, and have you experienced this, seen this? How have you dealt with this, and whatever other questions you've got for Janice?
And I have the chat window up as well if anybody wants to just post.
Hi, Janice.
Hi.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Really informative. So I just have a question on a batch size. If you want to measure the flow, does it mean the batch size needs to be similar? Like, how do you ensure there are things waiting to be done, 2 things or 3 things? If you want to measure how many you can complete in a cycle, you need to make sure the batch size are similar. Otherwise, it's not a fair comparison. So how do you make that happen while the work might be complex? Yeah.
Yeah. So when you say the batch size, you mean like how much work they have in progress?
No, like for example, if there are 10 user stories waiting to go into the flow, the user story points, how do you make sure they're comparable? They're like two points, because it's estimates. Sometimes 2 points user story might turn out to be 4 points.
So I'm trying to think of a quick way to answer this. There's a lot of work that's been done around variability and what we expect in knowledge work. And it's not like manufacturing where you expect everything to be exactly, the same, but kind of like you're saying, for measurement purposes, it is good to compare like with like. So one way that I've seen it work reasonably well is when you do have separate swim lanes, then you can sort of separate out the categories of the work. And often, like say, if there's support tickets or something like that, then they probably are reasonably similar. And then that's one way that people will do that. So then they'll get into that doing it by category. But I think on a certain level, though, you need to assume there will be some variability, right? There'll be some differences in, you'll have some larger work items and some smaller work items, and that's the reality of your work. So, there's, I think it becomes I talked about, does the system feel like a burden? If you're telling people that they have to make everything exactly the same size, it's not really realistic that they're going to be able to do that. And so I would say, don't worry too much about that. Worry more about how you're delivering, rather than saying, oh, we need to measure exactly to the hour or something. And that's why you're worrying about the size. I mean, your question is totally valid, and it makes perfect sense, but it is more common in Kanban to not worry as much about things being missing. Daniel, you're nodding. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and also it also helps when you've got a pull system, because you're working on the slot. So if it takes another day or another 2 days, who cares? At the end of the day, if that's the most important thing, it'll be in there. It'll be work in progress. When something pops out, then you've got a slot for something else. Yeah. So it tends not to matter as much.
Yeah.
I've just posted a really good blog post about this from David J. Anderson David J. Anderson webpage, School of Management webpage. Yeah.
It looks like some questions came in on the chat. Are there other metrics that measure flow? Does cycle time come into it? Cycle time does come into it. Well, I'm using cycle time in the popular sense of the word. I know in the Kanban University world, they often will refer to that as lead time. But Greg, I'm assuming when you say cycle time, you mean the time from the commitment point to the delivery. Yes, absolutely. That's a great way to measure flow, because which again, I'm a big fan of separating it by category, because otherwise, it's less meaningful and less manageable if it's huge mix of work. But it totally depends. I mean, some teams only do one one type of work anyway. So Greg, feel free to say more if you want to, any more.
And I think Greg Pat had a similar question. I'm not sure if that has already been answered now. Do you size each story in points and hours or not? I think that has been answered.
Yeah. I think so. I think that the answer on that would be that in Kanban, it does not dictate any way of estimating. So you do it however works for you. I would say hours coming from a background where we did hourly tasking. I'm not a fan of that. I think it's way too precise. I think that points, or relative sizing or something like that is probably a more practical way. The question is really, what are you trying to achieve with that? What is it that it's doing for you? And if it's something that at your business you feel passionate about, that you have to know, the estimate in advance, then, and that's informative for you, then do it. Yeah, but Kanban doesn't dictate it.
Mm. Yeah, I always say don't do metrics for the sake of doing metrics. Have metrics if you want to solve a problem. Yeah, right.
Debbie says, how do we manage management stakeholders who think everything is urgent? Yeah, that's hard. I'll tell you, that is a scenario that I have seen. I'm not saying this always happens, but I have seen that be one of the few scenarios where Kanban just fails. It's one of the extreme anti-patterns, I think, because so much of what goes on in Kanban is dependent on being able to triage the work and categorize the work. And so it largely depends on the management. I mean, in some cases, if you can show them that you've got something that's working, then they'll come around. The other thing you could try to do is have a coach or have another manager or something like kind of run interference, help to kind of talk them through this rationally. I mean, usually I think managers like that they're operating from a place of fear themselves. And so what they're looking for is some reassurance that their goals, that they're not going to look bad to the executive team. So it'll depend a bit on your actual circumstance. But in Kanban, I always say, number one is visibility. So even if you have a problem that you cannot solve, you can always make it visible. And you can always say, you could say, in the last quarter, we were told that all these things were urgent, and here's what actually happened. There are all kinds of ways that you can present information, present data that will potentially influence them, but it just totally depends on management. But that's a tough one.
There has also been a question from Curtis, and I'm wondering if it makes sense, Curtis, if you just unmute and describe it in your own words.
Hello.
Hi.
I'll check my video on as well for you. Yeah, so just listening in on the estimating and trying to make stories the same size kind of chat. I've heard this idea of just measuring how many items you do per week or per month, and then using that as a way of estimating. So saying, if we put in this new item in and you need to know when it's going to be done, and you've got 10 items ahead and we do an average of 10 items a week, then this will probably take us a week. It was more like, that sounds good in theory, but has anyone used that in practice and had any success doing it that way?
Yeah, that's what you would call throughput. And I again, I keep saying this, but I think doing that in a where you can say, okay, we do this type of work, we do this, a specific class of service, we do a specific work item type, and we can do that many of that, because then there is some consistency, and you can say, and we know that this is how long it takes us. Also, if you really wanted to get fancy, you could get into more control charts and that kind of thing, which will give you data showing you how long things are taking, and outliers, and you can really get into probabilistic forecasting with your work. But to your question of has anyone used throughput as a measure, I don't know. Eric, you are nodding your head. Can you talk to us?
Yeah, it's definitely something that people can do. You have to have a system that is reasonably stable for it to work, and it still helps to think in confidence intervals and probability ranges. But yeah, that's the basic underlying mechanism for doing predictability in this kind of system.
Can I also jump in here, please, Janice?
Yeah.
I think the three metrics that Janice mentioned around WIP, cycle time and throughput are fairly important. And the one thing I do like about them compared to estimates is they are describing how your system actually works, not how we think it might work, which is what an estimate is. And I think that's where a lot of people get in trouble, because what they think and the reality are actually quite different. They might be thinking about effort when they do estimate. They're not thinking about duration and all the delays that Janice talked about. So that's where I think those metrics that she mentioned can be quite often a lot more useful and a lot more, I guess, reliable than just pure estimates.
And Dan, I see you posted a link. Don't follow the ball, look at the whole pitch.
Yeah, that's the one.
So that looks
one
good.
of my blog posts.
Yeah. Right. Were there, let's see, just going through. Any other questions?
Yeah. Any other questions?
Janice, I was struck in listening to some of your guidance by remembering the old Kanban Fight Club metaphor, where
Yes.
sometimes you go into teams and you just can't say those words,
Yeah.
not even like limit WIP or anything like that. You just do some things that sort of unlock better flow and let the team appreciate that. And then eventually they'll ask you, how did you do that? And then you can get into the Japanese words and all of that. But a lot of what I end up doing in Scrum teams is just say, hey, try this, and don't really give it a name, because that evokes the kind of resistance that would make it not happen.
The other thing that I've seen people do is they call it flow. We're using flow instead of Kanban, which doesn't really make sense to me, but I mean it makes sense, but it's like, if you're going to say that, you might as well just say Kanban. But yeah, it's interesting.
Thank you. Very good.
Rachel said she'll find me on LinkedIn. Please, anyone who wants to, do connect with me on LinkedIn.
Nice. We have 3 minutes left. If there are any more questions, now is the moment. Okay, cool. Then I would say thank you so much, everybody, for joining. You will find the recording in our YouTube channel. Next month, we will have Becky Watson from Australia, who will show us the new Jira plugin for Kanban visualization, better Kanban visualization than what there is currently. Looks pretty cool. And we will have Clark Ching in 2 months, who will show us where to put your bottleneck properly.
Isn't he the bottleneck guy?
He is the bottleneck guy, yeah. So that's his topic. Exactly. Any last words from Janice and Dan?
I just wanted to thank Janice for coming along to the meetup and presenting this. It was really great talk. I really enjoyed it, and I think it's probably very relevant to everyone who's done knowledge work before, has seen or experienced this. It's and give really good, useful things that people can do to actually. You can try this tomorrow or today. Just go give it a try.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. This is fun.
Okay, cool. I will stop the recording, and Graham, I will put the link in the chat in a minute. So for the recording, thanks everybody again. See you next time.